Good day everyone, I am Michael, the moderator for this webinar. I welcome everyone for today's webinar, which is Reasonable Accommodation Concerning Service and Assistance Animals. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our presenter for today, Paul Flugstedt. Paul has been involved in the real estate industry for the past 38 years. He specializes in fair housing issues. I would now like to hand over the floor to the speaker. Over to you, Paul.
Very good. Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, everybody. And today we're going to be talking about reasonable accommodation and service and assisted animals. So the first thing we need to talk about is the reasonable accommodation and how that's going to work when you get to the assisted animals and service animals. What is a reasonable accommodation? They are changes in rules, policies, practices, and the way services are provided. So the accommodation process, basically, the resident must request a reasonable accommodation. It does not have to be in writing. Legally, it does not have to be in writing. So the first criteria is they have to be disabled. In requesting the accommodation, the individual has disclosed that he or she has a disability. You have to establish that there's an identifiable relationship or a nexus between what's requested in the accommodation and in the individual's disability. A provider can deny a request if the request was not made on or by or on behalf of the person with a disability, or if there is no disability-related need for the accommodation, and you want to determine that the accommodation is reasonable. So the undue burden comes into play with the cost of the accommodation. So a fundamental alteration would be a modification that alters the essential nature of the provider's operation. Once an accommodation is determined to be reasonable, the landlord cannot directly or indirectly impose on the tenant the expense of providing the accommodation. If the request is denied by the provider, try to initiate an interactive process to reach a compromise agreement. So make sure that you can always negotiate with the person that's asking and see if there's another way to do that for them. A housing provider cannot charge extra fees or require additional deposits as a condition of granting a reasonable accommodation. According to the census, approximately 1 in 5 people have some type of long-lasting condition or disability. Now, disability again means a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. Disability, what are some major life activities? That's pretty common sense. Seeing, hearing, breathing, walking, talking. Examples of impairments, anything. You could have autism, you could have epilepsy. Persons with a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. There's visible or invisible impairments. And under the Fair Housing Act, a disability is a physical or mental impairment substantially limiting these major life activities. Now, non-observable, certain impairments, however, including impairments may form the basis of a request of an emotional support animal. Determination, you could get disability benefits, SSI or SSDI, Medicare, Supplemental Security, housing assistance or housing vouchers because of a disability for purposes of the Fair Housing Act, which is pretty open and pretty broad. Under DOJ's regulations implemented with the Americans with Disabilities Act, examples again, deafness, blindness, any of those things would qualify as a determination of disability. It simply means that in virtually all cases, these conditions will be covered as disabilities. Why grant a reasonable accommodation? Because policies, practices, and services may have a different effect on persons with disabilities. Housing providers to make reasonable accommodations to rules, policies, or practices. What can't you ask? You can't ask nor ordinarily the nature or severity of an individual's disability. What should you do when you get the request? Accept a verbal request, engage in some interactive discussion if we need. The disability must be substantially limited or more than major life activities. The disability does not have to be obvious. People don't need to be able to know that you have a disability. Your disability doesn't have to require you to use any assistive devices. Your disability doesn't have to be physical. Discrimination in the rental or housing because of a handicap or disability of the renter Persons who currently engage in illegal use of drugs are not included in the definition. Persons convicted of illegal manufacture, distribution of controlled substances, these would not be included. Prospective residents should not have to provide copies of their medical records of any type. Now, as far as the assistance animals go, including some of the new HUD guidance about the disability access, comprise almost 60% of the HUD complaints. So what are service animals under the American Disability Act? The definition of a service animal is any dog. Now they've defined it just as a dog can be a service animal. Service animal is any dog that is individually trained to do work or perform tasks for the benefit of the individual with a disability. Questions to determine if it's a service animal. It is advisable for housing providers to limit inquiries to the following two questions. Is a person disabled? When you're verifying it, does this person need an accommodation because of that disability? There are a lot of these online prescriptions or certifications or registrations. You get a fancy certificate and collars and dog tags and all kinds of things. Under the Fair Housing Act, a housing provider may request reliable documentation. By contrast, many legitimate licensed healthcare professionals deliver services, and that's who you need to go for your guidance. There is no official registry of assistance animals, and some states are really getting strict about people trying to falsify that information to try to get the animal in. The person has to provide the verification from a therapeutic source, in other words, medical professional. Now, reasonably supporting the information is also considered information of a licensed healthcare professional. A relationship or connection between the disability and the need for that assistance animal also must be provided, be identified as in the guidance for assistance animals. Type of animal is the animal commonly kept in households. Now, under the Fair Housing Act, assistant animals have no automatic restrictions on species, breed, weight, or size. And time for decision, time frame for decision, again, like we talked about, is 10 days. Does not require a dwelling to be made available to an individual whose tenancy would constitute a direct threat. And housing provider may not charge a fee for processing a reasonable accommodation request. Pet rules do not apply to service animals and support animals, and person with disabilities responsible for feeding and maintaining and providing veterinary care. It's, best practices. HUD strongly encourages individuals with disabilities and housing providers. Failure to adhere to the guidance does not necessarily constitute a violation. Before denying a reasonable accommodation request, the lack of information. Again, your reasonable request, you need to have a verification, and it has to have that nexus or that connection. Lots of times, doctors will write a prescription pad for the verification request, a companion animal request form to take to the doctor or send to the doctor to verify the need of that animal. Information requested on you having policies at your property. These need to be ready to go in writing. So I think we've covered a lot of the basics. Animal situation is just really a kind of a hot button issue, and I think if you follow the guidance there of always asking for a verification from a medical professional instead of any other type of feature with the internet scam certificates and whatever. And I thank you very much for attending, and I appreciate your attending. So have a good afternoon and take care. Thank you, Michael, as well.
So that does conclude the session for today. Thank you everyone for participating. You may all disconnect now. Have a great day ahead. Bye-bye.
Thank you.